This is the news and talk of Texas.
It's DFW's Court of Public Opinion
with Rick Roberts.
I've been talking about term limits on the radio, supporting term limits, calling for term limits, whether it's convention of states or I don't care how you get it done, just get it done. I've been doing that for 10, 15 years at least, maybe longer. And one thing I've found, I don't let politicians come on this show and give me their corporate bottom line, something that some intern put together on a 3x5 card. If they'll come in and talk about the issues that they're involved with as it applies to the people that they supposedly govern, that's one thing. And what I've found, whether I'm talking to somebody very high up, I know a lot of people in the Senate in Congress personally, and we talk off the air, but I'm talking about on the air. If you talk to these people individually about term limits, not only term limits, I'm in favor of campaign finance reform, but specifically term limits. If you talk to them individually, it's, oh yeah, Rick, I'm for that. You bet. I'm right there with you. But then as soon as they get in a group of their peers, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, all of a sudden, term limits, well, we'd have to redo the staff. And I mean, I've heard every argument you can imagine, and I've shot it down in each and every case. Well, citizen legislators, not career politicians. That's the goal of U.S. term limits. It's an organization dedicated to enacting term limits on federally elected representatives and senators. With me, and I'm very pleased to have Chris Ekstrom, chair of Texas for Congressional Term Limits, to talk about that organization. Mr. Ekstrom, thank you for being with me. I appreciate it.
Hey, Rick. Just call me Chris, and I'm pleased to be with you.
Well, how do we get this done? I mean, in the long and short of it, people talk about it all the time, and, I'm one of those guys, let's less talk and more action. What is it your organization, U.S. Term Limits, is doing to make this a reality?
Well, let me give you a little background on myself. I am not elected. I did run for Congress in this during this cycle in Texas 13, which is the old Mac Thornberry seat, now held by Ronnie Jackson, who I think is going to be good. But I'm not elected, and I agreed to be the chairman in Texas because I think we're going to have another round of primaries. We're going to see primaries all over the place, including the Texas legislature. And I think the reason we're going to see that is because the 2020 election was a profound disappointment to people who really care about the future for real. And they realize that these guys we have often become just a permanent political clique, what you described as their peers. They look at themselves as members of fraternity. And that's the problem. I mean, simply speaking, it's all of our duty to get involved in politics and to be citizen legislatures. So the first thing is get rid of the career politicians, try to take the administrative state down a bit. But here's the next part, and here's the part some people may not like on the radio here. If you're a citizen and you're totally useless and you don't do anything, you don't vote, you don't contribute, you make very scant efforts, and then you get on the phone and whine to people about it, maybe call in the show sometimes and whine, then you're part of the problem. Get off your butt and start voting for people that are for real. And the way you find out if they're for real is by being diligent and holding their damn feet to the fire instead of acting like they're your friend who you take a selfie with. None of them are your friends. Many of them are incompetent and stupid, and you need to approach it that way to some degree. You can't just be looking for a savior that's going to come down and magically solve the problem. The founders were very realistic about human nature. People are not inherently good. They are inherently self-seeking. So in order to combat that, we need to get a rule that basically forbids lifetime tenures in the House or in the Senate, which is we have many cases of that. So I'm very passionate about this. I don't want to screw around. I want to get it done. They've been talking about this for 15 years. It's time to just pull the damn plug on lifetime tenure in the Congress. But the people and the voters are going to have to join me in the passion and demand it.
No, you're absolutely right. One of the mantras of this show's and others, I'm sure. A good example is Dirty Harry Reid. He shows up in D.C. representing Nevada. He shows up in D.C. just as poor as he could be, and he leaves decades later, multi-millionaire. I know what his salary was, so how'd he get it? He got it by selling off Access. Familiarity breeds dissent. Never was that more true than these. It's almost like a lifetime appointment in some cases. The founding fathers, you're right, man. I mean, it's almost like they knew what was going to happen. The way it was supposed to be, you would leave your business or the farm or whatever it was and go represent the people. You did a good job. You came back, got a pat on the back and an attaboy, and went back to your business or your farm. If you didn't do such a good job, usually you found another place to live. No, the founding fathers never intended for somebody to go up and be a professional politician. I don't even know if that was in their vocabulary. You were supposed to go and represent and go home.
That's right. Nobody was supposed to pat you on the back for doing the things you're supposed to do, like take care of your family and other things. When you go up there to be a politician, you're supposed to be responsible. If you look at the web pages or the Facebook pages of most of these politicians, if they do anything at all, they act like they're God's gift to the earth. I mean, and they want to be patted on the back and told how wonderful they are. And then when guys like me hold their feet to the fire and give them a hard time, I'm doing it in Texas right now on other issues, they whine and cry about how mean and whatever I am. Listen, most of these guys are failed lawyers. They couldn't cut it in the real world. And so they wisely took a job in which you can't virtually not be fired once you're elected, and they go up there and sit on their butt and do nothing. Lobbyists. No, they do that. So let's not forget that. They take lots of money from lobbyists. They get payoffs when they get out of the office and go to work for some military contractor. I ran against somebody like that who, God knows, he'll be a lobbyist for the military-industrial complex, and I'm sure he'll make a nice $1 million a year. So don't cry for him.
Talking with Chris Ekstrom, chair of the Texas for Congressional Term Limits. Chris, I've got to step aside very quickly, do a little business. If you can stick with me, let's talk about how close we are to the realization for where we should be. I try to send this message, and it should be the politicians should be our employees. That's the way it was set up. They work for us. We shouldn't be the tail wagging the dog. I mean, and the sooner you send that message by virtue of your ability to vote the right people in office, the better off all of us will be, who understands they're there by virtue of the fact that we want them there or voted them in to do whatever job it was. They serve at our pleasure, or they should. But that message is long past. When we come back, let's find out how close we actually are to any type of term limits in America, because God knows we need it. I'm Rick Roberts, News Talk 820 WBAP. All right, 19 minutes after the hour, talking with Chris Ekstrom, chair of Texas for Congressional Term Limits. His organization, U.S. Term Limits, support term limits for U.S. representatives and senators. And Chris, I think anybody that's got two functioning brain cells realizes what's going on in the nation's capital. I've actually worked there, and man, I have no desire to go back. Let's talk about where we are on term limits and whether it's something that you think may come to fruition in our lifetime, for God's sake.
Rick, to answer your question fully, candidly, the answer on when it will happen is I have no idea, and I don't think anyone does. But it will never happen if people like me, who've accepted this position, are not pushing for it in a fairly radical way. And what that means is not caring about the current crop of politicians' career plans or feelings. And that's one of it. And the other thing is getting our state legislatures to do it, because they actually are the key to limiting the federals, at least initially. Now, states like Missouri, where I'm originally from, have term limits for legislators in their state situation. And I think that's great, too. There are people that complain about it a little bit, but they don't support us. The polling that we have from a guy who I used as my personal pollster in my political race, John McLaughlin, did a poll in 2018, and he said 89% of Republicans, 76% of Democrats, and 83% of independents support term limits. And really, term limits are what they say they are. It means you only get 3 terms in Congress, or you only get 2 terms in Senate. It's not like open to a lot of wild adaptation there.
Scott Rasmussen's a great guy, and for my money, a good pollster compared to all the rest. And we were discussing this one time, and he said, yeah, just about everybody. You find people on both sides of the aisle that are emphatic about the fact, you bet, we need term limits. But it's something that everybody wants, but nobody gripes and complains and throws a fit when we don't get it. Maybe that's what we've got to do.
I think so. I think that the citizens are a lot more powerful than they realize. And when they come together and they simply demand something, Rick, I think they're able to influence these guys a lot more, and ladies, than they realize. So you come to a critical mass of where people are disgusted with the misapplication of our system. Our system is a great system, but when you abuse it for a century, it's to run down. And I think we're in that crisis mode, frankly, now. I really do.
Chris, listen, I've never talked with you, and I should have. I like what you have to say. And what you have to say, I think, especially in this current political climate, is very important. If people want more information about U.S. term limits, about your organization, how do they go about getting that?
Well, the best way to do it is to go to termlimits.com, and then they will instantly kind of get the whole program broken down. And since this has been going on for so long, the people behind it, a man named Howard Rich, who has relentlessly pursued this for 2 decades, there's a really clear-cut answer to most questions there. And, of course, people can go to my Facebook page, which is Chris Ekstrom for Congress. I've kept that going. I'll probably rename it at some point, but it's there. And they can submit any question to me, and I'll be happy to answer it.
All right, let me just confirm before we break, because you cut out on me there. Termlimits.com?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Bill, if we can get that up there, because I know a ton of people, they always email, who was that guy? How do I get a hold? It's termlimits.com. We'll get it up on the show page as well. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it.
All right. Little business, take you to the WBAP newsroom for the very latest breaking news, and then back with your calls. Let you hear a little more from Trump, and then you won't believe some of the emails I got. I'll tell you about that on News Talk 820 WBAP. WBAP. WBAP.